So we just mentioned this dilemma that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has. She does not draw a salary until she is inaugurated. Apparently, she's going to have to stay in a hotel the night before she's inaugurated because she cannot afford to get an apartment in Washington, D.C. And you hear these stories, like Chuck Schumer and Dick Durbin used to, like, they were roomies.
Oh, God, what a misery. Jesus, could you imagine our
It does seem
Dick
absurd
Durbin,
that
Chuck
there
Schumer.
isn't that there isn't some type of like housing allowance for members of Congress. I mean, we should have housing allowance for everybody.
Scott Pruitt got a sort of housing allowance.
In a way, yes, he did. And actually, here's a clip of two folks from Fox News who sort of are just about to suggest something like that, something equally as illegal. Look, she can't use her campaign funds to spend on herself. Otherwise, she would be like Duncan Hunter and would need a Republican district to get reelected after being indicted for spending your campaign money. But here's Fox News people not necessarily being aware that that's not appropriate.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she says that she's having a hard time with something. Do we have it now or should I wait? Okay. Let me know when we have it. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says this: I have 3 months without a salary before I'm a member of Congress. So how do I get an apartment? Those little things are very real. She said this to the New York Times. What do you think of that?
It's very Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez to say this. I think her supporters
Pause
like
it.
it. This is
What
who
the
she is.
fuck does that mean? Like, honestly, like how tone deaf? Like, this is totally like her to say this.
Do they think she's making it up?
No, they just think that, like, it's just like so.
She's such a downer.
So it's such a core brand proposition for her not to actually be a millionaire.
Yeah, it's really annoying
in
how
the
poor
House.
she insists on being.
How many millionaires are there in the House? Like, the percentage of I mean, I know in the Senate, like, it's something like 93% of senators are millionaires. In the House, it's probably not nearly as high, but you're talking about wealthy people.
How many are in that studio?
And
maybe not millionaires.
Of course.
Yeah.
There, I mean, it's absurd. You know, the obvious response to this is like, this is a real problem. Because A, it's a real problem in terms of that's what a lot of people in the country experience. In fact, the vast majority of them. Certainly none. I mean, the percentage of people in this country who could afford to maintain an apartment in New York and Washington, D.C. is probably somewhere around 4 to 5%, right? Like maybe that would, to have the cash, disposable cash to go and just like, and the idea that their response to this is to laugh, like it just expresses how tone deaf they are. But pick it up from her quote.
Times. What do you think of that?
It's very Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez to say this. I think her supporters like it. This is who she is. She comes from the Bronx. She's young, youngest member of Congress. It's tough to get an apartment in D.C. I also think she's not alone. She might be the only one talking about it, but a lot of congressmen in Washington, D.C. say, given the cost of living there, it's not exactly the Washington.
Pause it now. One thing I enjoy about this is that I can't stop but look at her diamond earrings as she's talking, as she's saying this.
And she uses the most gringo possible pronunciation of her name.
Right. And, you know, I mispronounce everybo's name. So nice. I'm not going to, you know, hold anybody to account for that. But the other part is like, this is a newsflash. Ocasio-Cortez is not a congressman. She's a woman. And so there's other Congress folks,
could be a
people in
person.
Congress members of Congress who are going through this. You would
should
say.
Be or Congress person.
There you
should
go.
Be Congress person.
Talking about it, but a lot of congressmen in Washington, D.C. say, given the cost of living there, it's not exactly the Washington.
I think that quote was preceded by a year and a half ago. I was tending bar in Brooklyn, or something, which is true, by the way.
Well, that's playing to her base. But the fact of the matter is, Washington D.C. and the greater metropolitan area is the most expensive county in the world to live in America now. So I think what she's talking about is all of the money in Washington, all of the wealth in Washington, all of the power, and a little simple person like her from New York can't find a place to live. It is a brilliant political line.
Are you telling me?
On the other hand, her resume that Shelby just mentioned about being from the Bronx, it turns out when you read deeper, she had a lot more formative years in Westchester County, New York, which is a little ritzier than the Bronx. I'm from New York. I don't want to throw stones at any boroughs or counties, but her resume doesn't always match up. And some of those shoots during the campaign, she had these multi-$1,000 outfits that could pay a month's rent in Washington, D.C. You're right. Well, I live in Washington. It's very expensive, but she's been all over the map on some of this stuff.
Overall.
What a liar.
And this segment is literally buttoned by a woman whose main contribution to life, to American life, is lying, being like a conduit for lies about WMDs in Iraq. I didn't even know that. Like, we have a segment. First, we're going to trash her and just mock people with low incomes generally, because why not? And then it's like, oh, yeah, she's an idiot.
She's playing to her base. By the way, she doesn't keep those dresses she
also,
makes
it's
for appearance.
Like playing to your base of Dick Cheney calling you on a phone and
Right.
lying to you about Iraq intelligence, then printing it, and then Dick Cheney going on Meet the Press and saying, well, you know, there's an anonymous source that I just read about in the New York Times, which was himself literally laundering his own lies for an illegal invasion. And that woman is the one in the fucking segment? Jesus Christ, man.
If AOC wanted an apartment, she would have done that stuff too. She made her choice.
She wasn't old enough to sleep with Gaddafi and lie about WMDs.
It is really stunning, their ability to ignore the actual just simple reality of, rather than even saying Washington D is super expensive, most people, the vast majority of Americans, do not have the ability to put down the extra $1,600 to $3,500, whatever it is going to be for a studio apartment in Washington, D.C. They don't have that available just in their bank account.
Yeah. I mean, what she was saying is true. It is an effective political line. And just saying it with a snarky tone of voice doesn't make it bad.
Right.
Like, that's a good thing that this is her political line, because low-income people are not represented in our government right now at all.
Yeah, they say it in a tone of like, that's not fair that she gets to say she was a bartender last year. That's what is it, Abraham Lincoln in a cabin now all of a sudden?
She had a good response tweet about it, actually.
He didn't chop down the cherry tree, which is a great political line.
She said there is no reason to be ashamed or embarrassed. Mocking lower incomes is exactly how those who benefit from and promote wealth inequality the most keep everyday people silent about one of the worst threats to American society, that the rich are getting richer and the poor poorer. Boom. And like, I've even dealt with this in my own work, in my own life, like writing about millennials and finances and housing and stuff. Like, because I write in the first person a lot. And like in one of my Guardian columns, I'm like, should I not admit that I am a broke millennial who spends more than half of my income on housing? And I was like, no, like that's not my fault. Like there's nothing to be ashamed of.
Well, it also, you know, I don't know if she was raised in Westchester, and I don't know where in Westchester, and I don't know the circumstances.
I mean, you can see the house. It's not a mansion.
But the bottom line is, even still, yeah, I mean, she's a grown woman, and probably her parents need their money too.
Her dad passed away.
All
That's a big part of her story, is having to work to basically help salvage a family home, I think, because her father passed away.
Yeah, if you don't know the backstory.
It's just absurd.
Like the guy said, if you look at it a bit closer. No, look at it a bit closer.
Yeah, exactly. Take their word for it and look at it a bit closer. And incidentally, look at Judith Miller a bit closer.
Unrelated, but I think I almost met her at Politicon.
Oh my God.
Wow.
Brendan, was she
You could have had your Henry Kissinger.
Okay.
You could have had
So
your Henry Kissinger moment.
I did. I totally ignored her.
Good.
Because I wasn't sure if it was her. But I thought, if it's her, I don't even want to acknowledge her presence. And I can't remember who I was talking to. But I think he introduced her as Judy. And I was just like, and just did one of these. And that's when I started getting like a little bit creeped out. Like, I don't even want to be around any of this shit.
The fuck was that?
I need my security guy. Where's the bald guy?
I need someone to protect me from Judith Miller.
Well, I just don't want even
bad juju.
Acknowledge.
Yeah, you don't want the picture.
Well, it's not just it's not like I'm afraid of being seen with her. It's that if I actually start talking to this lady, I don't want, I was saying I went to a viewing of this Vice, this Adam McKay movie, and it was a good movie. And it was interesting. I mean, most of this stuff about Dick Cheney in terms of what he did as vice president, I was aware of because this was an era where I read, every book that came out and interviewed all the authors of the books about Dick Cheney. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know about his life personally at all. And it was, and it's interesting, but I also I don't want this guy to be humanized in any way, because it's inevitable. If you make a film about somebody,
of course,
you're going to humanize them, right? Like, you want a movie and you want to capture what drives them, what's their family relationships like. Even if it shows that the guy's a scumbag, he's still being humanized. And my feeling about this is that it's dangerous to humanize these figures, because Dick Cheney's relevance to history is not what he did in his family life. And I can see the value of it, in the context of a book. If you want to seriously dive in and from an academic perspective, or from a very thoughtful perspective, understand what makes some of these psychos who seek power obsessively and use that power to the detriment of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Millions of people. I'm just thinking about the actual dead, which I think is probably closer to 750, and counting probably, in terms of what he unleashed. But
then it is in the millions. If you counting by what he unleashed,
right,
it is in the millions.
And so in my mind, it's and I can see it wouldn't be necessarily a very good movie to just show everything he did maybe as vice president and the implications of it. And I think that the movie captured a lot of that. I just am uncomfortable with any humanization of people like this. And that's why I never want to see them in person or any of that, because I'm sure they're human. Of course they're human. All humans are human.
Well, in his sense.
But for us to understand the implications of what they're doing, their humanity is wholly irrelevant. They are figures on a political stage using power, and there's not, if you're going to think about the humanity of all the people that were implicated by the decisions that Dick Cheney made as vice president, you could live for 1,000 years and not have the time to contemplate his humanity. The pain and suffering that this guy caused on innocent people, on children, on fathers, on mothers, on brothers, on sisters, it is so enormous that to contemplate his humanity is an injustice to these people.